I like your windswept hair. Very good. Yeah. Very good. That's what I wanted. Action. All right, here we go. Let's go dig your notes out. Let's go and get started. How'd you do?
I'm still reading.
Finish great. You finished on today. Good. Thank you. All right. I think people are doing well on this. All right, here we go. So, last night, a few people came to review, and that's good. And that's one of the ways I also grade your packet. You know, I kind of go through. I know who's here and who wasn't, and so that's how I acknowledge it by grading, especially those 3 pages where I said pages 6 through 10. You have to have work on it done. Being at the review session is my way of saying that you've worked on it. Next, I will, if I get enough people here, I said I would review things over lunch if you want to, but tomorrow at lunch, I will go through everything I can on page 11. 11 is due for you. You have to get that done, but I will go through as much as I can do at lunch. And then I'll see if people still want to do it on Wednesday. If you want to do, I will, and I will review Wednesday at 6 p.m. And I know there's a lot of things going, but you know that's part how I grade, and you know everything you can do to kind of feel better about a test like this, especially because this is the hardest of the AP test. And so it really, because they grade this hard. They grade it significantly harder than any other test.
More people take it, so they're just driven.
Exactly. Yeah. So we could argue what's, for some people the physics might be easy, for some people this might be easier, but I'm just telling you how you're exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, I'll do it today at lunch. And so if you want to come in, eat your lunch, whatever, and I will go through anything you have, any questions you have. All right, here we go. Did we got to brinksmanship and the bomb. I showed you this wonderful picture and that, me as a Ute. It's not me. Me across South Dakota, it's not me. I just thought that picture was funny, so I had to add it, and of course so let's get to Quemoy and Matsu. Quemoy and Matsu were little tiny islands in the Taiwan Strait. The People's Republic of China threatened them, and the United States threatened nuclear war. Even sent the 5th Fleet. That's the carrier Intrepid. 2 different times. And we threatened nuclear war over 2 tiny islands. Here and here. No one lives on Matsu. And we threatened nuclear war. Now, fortunately, nuclear war did not happen. Those are the years. Fortunately. But it shows the problem of brinksmanship. Are we really willing to risk nuclear war for 2 tiny islands in the Pacific, in the Taiwan Strait? Well, the answer was only for domestic politics. This was a way to look tough on communism. So Eisenhower could have his new look, hoping to end the arms race, but looking tough on communism. But this is clearly a flawed program. Are we really going to war over this? So Eisenhower had a contingency plan, the CIA. The world is too complex for just simply blowing the world up. But the CIA could operate covertly. Because of the National Security Act, it allowed for this shadow government. And even though it's going to be operating in conditions of breaking the law, it can be done in secret. So these are things, this is actually from the Stasi Museum, the East German Secret Police Museum, and they pitch it with a camera on it. So I just thought that was a funny little spy thing. Hey, I recommend going to that museum. But to use the CIA, In fact, here's John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, and his brother, Allen Dulles, ran the CIA. So they're going to do covert actions that the public, specifically the people of the United States, will not know, and then the results are hoping to claim as victories for democracy. In the first place, this will happen, and this will be the most crucial, one of the biggest covert operations in American history. Iran. In the country of Iran, where the United States will use the CIA to overthrow a democracy. So here's what happened. The United Kingdom, years ago, 50 years before that. Huh? Oh, we got the wrong one. The United Kingdom had a treaty with then it was called Persia. Iran was called Persia. Well, they got about 98% of the oil revenues from Persia. Yeah, this was an unbelievable treaty. And after World War II, you can imagine, Britain was broke. They wanted to keep this oil flowing in to the company that would soon be called British Petroleum, or BP. Well, Iran, after the war, a homegrown democracy. A democratic republic, actually a constitutional monarchy. Their king, called the Shah, was still technically the king, but they created homegrown democracy. Have a parliament, a democratic system. Their president, the equivalent of a prime minister in Britain, was Mohammad Mossadegh. There he is right here on the cover of Time magazine. He was a nationalist, and he understood that the only way Iran is ever going to modernize and do something about their horrific poverty rate is to keep the oil revenues within Iran instead of going to Britain, which it almost all was. Here are Iranians working on an oil pipeline for the British under British supervision. They begged Britain for 3 years to renegotiate that treaty. Britain refused. And so Iran nationalized the oil, which meant they took over the oil. And Britain freaked out. How dare they take the oil? In fact, their joke was, we stole that oil fair and square. They even blockaded Iran. And they wanted to overthrow Mossadegh and put in a government more compliant, aka a dictatorship. They went to Truman. Truman's still president in 52. Truman said no, but there was an election in 52, and Eisenhower was elected president. In fact, the new prime minister of Great Britain, his party had just been elected. He went and visited President-elect Eisenhower and Dulles, who Eisenhower announced as Secretary of State. The new prime minister of Great Britain was Winston Churchill. He was back as prime minister. He was prime minister during much of World War II. And so Churchill went to Eisenhower, as president-elect, saying, will you help us overthrow Iran? But he didn't say it as, we want to get rid of Mossadegh because we want to steal their oil. He said, because Mossadegh is a what? Communist. And the Ike brothers say yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
They say he's a communist. I didn't write that down, but put that down. He's a communist. And Ike and Dulles, the Dulles brothers, Secretary of State and head of the CIA, said yes. And they worked with British intelligence out of the U.S. Embassy. Mossadegh believed the United States was somebody they could trust. And so that allowed the CIA basically to pay off the military, to pay off others, to overthrow the government. So they used the CIA. In fact, the guy was Kermit Washington, Teddy Roosevelt's grandson, would be the man in charge. Kind of a cowboy. And they paid off members of the army and fundamentalist Shia clerics, saying that Mossadegh is going to get rid of Islam. So they said we have to, so they got with the army, clerics, and the former, or the Shah, who had no real power. It actually failed. It failed miserably. It failed, but then they would create a mob. And here's the mob. And they engineered it by just buying off the poor of Iran to march on Tehran. And Mossadegh was taken completely by surprise, and his government was toppled.
Now, nobody inside the United States knew this happened, except for a small little group in the White House. So everyone got that? We, the people, did not know. Nobody in the United States knew until 1976. Now, people said it happened. Iranians said it happened. But we're like, oh, that's communist propaganda. The government was toppled. There's Mossadegh under arrest. He is replaced by, well, the Shah, the king, took full power, Reza Pahlavi. So when I was a little kid, I knew about the Shah because of the growing dependence on oil and the importance of the Middle East towards oil. And to the United States, they said that this was democracy on the march. Communism has been destroyed. Anybody want to guess what type of government the Shah created? A horribly brutal dictatorship that was famous for its secret police and the torture of dissidents, where the only ones who would fight against him would be the most radical fundamentalist Shia Muslims. Inside Iran, they knew what happened. The United States did this. What about the oil? Well, here's the oil agreement, and it's kind of startling. British oil, the British Petroleum got 40% of the oil revenues. American oil companies got 40% of the oil revenues. And the Shah got 20%. I don't mean Iran. I mean the Shah got 20%. And so, of course, he became incredibly rich. And Iran, for the most part, people remained impoverished. And they would buy all kinds of weapons for the United States. It became a key weapon or key place hinge in the fight against communism. The U.S. would have bases there, etc. And a growing revolutionary movement blaming the United States, this is from 1978, would begin to grow. The United States for toppling this democracy. And we can't go into all the details of what's going to happen out of this, but it will be a disaster by the 1970s. Because the United States, while claiming to support democracy, will be supporting a brutal dictator and overthrew a homegrown democracy, telling most countries in the Middle East, you want a democracy? Who's coming? This is actually a really, really scary moment. There's a term for this. It's called blowback, the unintended consequences. This is going to lead to an Islamic revolution in Iran. They'll overthrow the Shah and replace it with a fundamentalist Shia state that still exists to this day. And their mortal enemy and their greatest fear is the United States because of what the United States did. And the United States still talks about it. We have a law actually passed too that we want to help get rid of the Iranian government. That's part of the reason they want to build nuclear weapons. But this is going to have rippling effects all over the Middle East. That will affect everything to a horrible civil war in Afghanistan that will begin in 1979 and still going. It will also lead to radical fundamentalist Shia and Sunni Muslims all over the Middle Eastern world, blaming the United States for their problems. It will lead to a horrible Iranian-Iraqi war that will lead to an Iranian invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and the U.S. would be involved there. Eventually, this will have a direct effect on the September 11, 2001 attack, the U.S. failed invasion of Iraq, and you can keep going. This never ends. This will have horrible repercussions down the road. We're not done. 1954, the CIA, flushed with their success in Iran, had another target, and this time in this hemisphere. Guatemala, in the late 1940s, finally got a democracy there after years of brutal dictatorships, controlled by the banana company. Their president, Cabo Arbenz, right here. There he is, and once again on Time magazine. And there's Arbenz, and basically he's talking about reform. The vast majority of land in Guatemala are either owned by a few Guatemalan landholders, or, remember this company, United Fruit. United Fruit. By the way, that's a real sign with the gun. That's a little bit creepy. They dominated Guatemalan politics. And the vast majority of Guatemalans were desperately poor, with few prospects. And the Arbenz government, he too is a nationalist. He is going to do something about this. The Guatemalan Congress passes a law that's going to be called land reform. And land reform, and this is an advertisement for this, they are going to force the big landlords in United Fruit to sell their land and then give it to peasants. So the peasants can grow their own crops, especially obviously bananas, form cooperatives of peasants so the money stays in Guatemala. Land reform. So they're not even talking what Iran did. Iran just took the oil, even though Britain, they paid for it pretty clearly after the policy. This one, no, we'll pay. Well, you can imagine how this went over in the United States. United Fruit began a massive propaganda campaign against the Arbenz government. And of course, land reform, meaning he's a what? He's a communist. Was he a communist? No. Well, neither was most of that. I should add, there were communists in parliament in Iran, but not in Iran. And there are a few socialists in here, but he was a moderate. But he was trying to figure out a way to do something about the horrific poverty rate. And so the CIA, flushed with that, decided to train an exile army. They called them freedom fighters in Honduras. The CIA's kept it secret, even though they basically got this kind of ragtag crew. Some were Hondurans, some were Guatemalans. I should add, Honduras had a very pliable dictatorship. They found an army officer with delusions of grandeur, Carlos Armas, right here with an unfortunate mustache, and he would be the head of these freedom fighters. And they would overthrow the government. And the thought was they would drive over the border and the government would collapse. Actually, it was a disaster. They would trigger this popular uprising, but it failed miserably. They crossed the border. The tiny little Guatemalan police force, border guards, fired a couple shots at them, and they turned around and what? It was a disaster, not going to work. But the CIA was not done. The CIA organized a diversion. Guatemala didn't have an air force. So CIA pilots flew some World War II era planes claiming they're Armas's Air Force, and they buzzed Guatemala City. And there's nothing Arbenz could do. They set up a fake radio station saying the Armas army is winning victory after victory. And then they even put massive speakers on the roof of the United States Embassy, and they were playing battle sounds to make it sound like Armas's army's on the march. And Arbenz realized he was the United States is going to overthrow this government. And he thought this could turn into a bloodbath. And so Armas would win. Here's Armas being driven in, there he is, into Guatemala City after Arbenz resigned and went into exile. See this guy? He's CIA from the United States, driving them in. How did the United States announce this? Democracy. Democracy on the march. What kind of government did Armas set up? An absolutely brutal dictatorship, and that government lasts for over 20 years. And what's the situation in Guatemala today? Horrifically unstable, yeah. Yeah, the game bonds, because there's only a few people have almost all the wealth. So the only way to make money is through organized crime. Yeah, it's a disaster. And you can see, who knows if Arbenz would have been able to do this government, but let's be very clear about one thing. Everybody outside of the United States knew this was happening. Nobody inside the United States knew this happened until 1976. Nobody knew. So when Richard Nixon, the vice president, went down to South America on a goodwill tour, they had to cut it short because he first flew into Bogota, Colombia, and his motorcade was attacked by mobs, angry about what the United States had done, especially in Guatemala, but other places. I'm only giving you just a few. In fact, they attacked the car. They thought Nixon might be killed, the vice president. And nobody understood in the US why they're mad. Well, there's reasons they're mad, and there's distrust. And it goes back to this. Guatemala, Iran, two really important moments in the Cold War. And then, French Indochina. Remember, French Indochina was that French colony Japan took, led to the embargo. After World War II, the French wanted to keep their colony. France was desperate, humiliated after the war. They wanted this colony, and they, with the help of the British, the Americans, and ironically the Japanese, it's complex, wanted to retake this colony. Inside French Indochina were freedom fighters, known as the Viet Minh. And one of their leaders, the most important one right here, is Ho Chi Minh. He was a former teacher. He was actually at Paris during the Versailles negotiations asking for independence. And he fought against the Japanese. Here are American advisors with Ho Chi Minh helping him fight a guerrilla war against the Japanese occupation in 44 and 45. He declared independence, assuming that the United States would support him because they did during the war, but the United States did not because the Cold War had already begun in Truman's mind. Roosevelt actually kind of promised them that we will help you decolonize. But here's the deal. The Viet Minh wanted independence. They were nationalists. They wanted independent Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. But Ho Chi Minh was a confirmed socialist. Therefore, a communist. And the United States is going to start aiding the French effort to keep their colony with the logic of the domino theory. And if you think about it for a second, remember the United States got their independence after being a colony, and now they're helping the French keep their colony. Proclaiming the fight for democracy. Yeah. No, socialism is a form of communism. Communism is a form of socialism. But more moderate socialists and communists are bitter rivals, so they don't like each other. And so they fight all the time. And it's actually, communists and socialists hate each other more than other people hate communists and socialists. It's kind of funny. But they're more like bitter rivals and have different points. And so he's a communist. Who knows what Ho Chi Minh would have done? That's really not relevant. But the French sent at first a couple 100,000, eventually almost 600,000 troops. Many of them were, ironically, former SS soldiers who fought with the Nazis, who needed a second job. Hey, you find soldiers. Well, the United States began to aid the French war effort. The United States sent aid. In fact, by 52, the United States is paying half of the French war effort. And by 54, even by 52, the French won out. The French have realized we're not going to be able to hold this colony. And now the United States is basically begging the French to stay. Just like with China, now they didn't want to say they lost French Indochina. So they wanted the colony to stay. Here are French soldiers outside of Hanoi, finding a suspected Viet Minh. Well, the French got a strategy. China and Vietnam hate each other to this day, despise each other. But in this short little window, Mao Zedong, the head of the People's Republic of China, was trying to say he's a revolutionary fighting for freedom, and he was helping the Viet Minh. On the supply route is a place called Dien Bien Phu. And the French decided to take Dien Bien Phu with a lightning strike with paratroopers, take it as a negotiating position. They drop parachutists into this mountain valley. Here are French parachutists dropping in. And the thing about it is that Vietnam was a perfect place for guerrilla fighting, especially northern Vietnam. Mountains, jungles, steep valleys. Every time you're on a road, it was ambush hell. Parachutists could work in the short run. You drop them in and surprise the enemy. You didn't have to drive through a mountain valley. The problem with parachutists is twofold. They carry a limited amount of gear, and secondly, How do you get them out? It's a real problem. And so they took the Dien Phu and quickly the Viet Minh besieged it. And this would become massive news all through 1954. The French, here the supply trying to be dropped in. French parachute is right here. Eisenhower even talked about sending US troops and even talked about using nuclear weapons, an atomic bomb, to help the French. He even went to the Senate Majority Leader, the brand new Senate Majority Leader, a Democrat, and asked them, would the Democrats support using atomic weapons? And the Senate Majority Leader said, are you crazy? I should add, the Senate Majority Leader was a Texan by the name of Lyndon Johnson, who a decade later would be the president who would commit American troops to a civil war in South Vietnam. One of the tragedies of this whole thing, eventually the French would surrender. Humiliated, the French lost their colony. They were trying to do the same craziness in Algeria, with the same disaster for the French. And that's going to lead to a peace conference called the Geneva Accords, where they finally decided to divide French Indochina into 4 countries: Cambodia and Laos, and then North and South Vietnam. But it was decided at this conference, 4 parties met here: the French, the United States, the Viet Minh, and people representing the South. And there would be elections in North and South Vietnam someday in 56. So in 1956, to unify. So they created this demilitarized zone, and they would reunify. That's guy holding that pointer. That's Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. But everybody knew if there was an election, Ho Chi Minh would win. Ho Chi Minh's party would win. And to the United States, that was intolerable. So they went to the South and said, you can't allow this. And so they nixed the election. They nixed it. No election. So they said, the communists will cheat. Maybe or maybe not. Who knows? It didn't happen. But once this happened, this is going to set the sides of the war. Now the United States had its ally, the South, now violate the Geneva Accords. And to many, the Geneva Accords was another, here is Geneva, and there's Hitler, and you remember Neville Chamberlain, I mentioned before, with the umbrella. What is the name of the conference in 1938 where they gave up Czechoslovakia? Yeah, it's Munich. What do you call giving in to aggression? Do you remember that? Yeah, that's appeasement. Now, was this appeasement? I don't know. Didn't really look like it. But they're claiming that this is appeasement and we got to stop the communists. And that will be the beginnings of the Vietnam War. And the goal for the United States is a permanent South Vietnam, meaning 2 Vietnams, a North and South Vietnam. That is the American goal. That would be the American goal in Vietnam. The leader of South Vietnam, not chosen by the United States, was a man by the name of Nguyen Diem. It's pronounced TZ. Yeah. And there he is meeting Eisenhower. The United States tried to create a NATO-like alliance. Didn't last very long, but now we can say they're allies. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, CETO, Southeast Asia. He's an ally, so we must defend him. Well, Diem was incredibly corrupt, and his government was filled with cronies and family members, so very, very much nepotism. And almost immediately after this, we have a civil war in South Vietnam. The Vietnam War is a civil war in South Vietnam. And the National Liberation Front would fight against the Diem government and therefore against the U.S. ally. And they wanted one Vietnam. And they're mostly Southern fighters, guerrilla army. Yeah. CETO. It's a, remember NATO, that it's like a Southeast Asia alliance. It didn't last very long, but we tried to make them an ally, the same kind of thing as NATO. Well, Zem is no dummy, and he knew how to freak out the United States. The National Liberation Front are actually communists, and slang for communists in Vietnamese, the Viet Cong. And that's where the Viet Cong came about. Now, I should add two things. Most of the fighters were from the South in the Viet Cong. But, and this is the part you have to get, they were led from the North. Without a doubt. The Ho Chi Minh's government in Hanoi led them. This is their flag. But the United States would claim this was an invasion. Soon the United States started sending massive amounts of aid to South Vietnam. Massive amounts. And here's South Vietnam right here. Massive amounts of aid, and beginning in 1959, the United States started sending soldiers to train the South Vietnamese army. And so, the first U.S. soldier to die would be 1959. Because if you're training soldiers, you're basically training where the enemy is. And that is the beginning of the Vietnam War. And Eisenhower made it important. And then the next president is going to make it really important. He's going to be shot. And no one wants to go against what that president wanted. So, a couple more things happened. In 1956, okay, I'm not telling you every detail of the 1950s. Wow, the 50s, a lot of stuff happened. And Disneyland. But Hungary had one of the most repressive of the Stalinist governments behind the Iron Curtain. And the U.S. encouraged Hungary to overthrow this government and replace it with a more moderate government. And they did. And the U.S. promised them aid. We sent them propaganda in what's called Radio Free Europe. It was basically broadcast into Central and Eastern Europe from massive transmitters all over Western Europe. And it worked. Here, just after they toppled one of the statues of Stalin, you can always tell us there had been a revolution and statues have been toppled. You notice the nose is broke. So whenever you see a statue with a broken nose, it said, oh, the people revolted at least once against this leader or the government they want to propose. Overthrew it, replaced a moderate socialist state. And the United States vowed they would come to their aid. Well, the Soviets invaded, brutally putting this down, killing thousands. Here are Soviet tanks in the streets of Budapest. And the U.S. did not come to their aid. And they're still upset about this in Hungary to this day. In fact, that'd be one of the selling points of their fascist government now. But this shows the problem of the Cold War. Are we really willing to risk World War III for Hungary? That's a tough one. And the answer was no. What if they call your bluff? And that's what happened here. They called America's bluff. But I got to get to one thing. When this happened, I know I got to kind of bounce around here. Remember this guy, Stalin, the friend of all in Germany? He's our friend. The brutal dictator did something that surprised everybody and still kind of surprises me. He died. After the test, I will tell you the story of how he died and what happened. It's kind of an amazing story. But he died in 1953, and there would be a power struggle. So there is death and Stalin walking together saying, "You were always a great friend of mine, Joseph." That's a pretty good cartoon. I got to give it that. And then that brings up one other point. Since we're talking about totalitarian dictators, isn't Santa Claus kind of totalitarian? He knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He's watching. Think about it for a second. I just want you to ponder that for a second. So, nope, we're not going to watch that. After a power struggle, Nikita Khrushchev, who was shocked everybody, one of Stalin's cronies took power, and he wanted to end the arms race. He actually wanted to make the Soviet Union into his vision of a true socialist state, not the totalitarian monstrosity that Stalin created. He even denounced Stalin secretly in 56 and publicly in 59.
In fact, the tens of thousands of Stalin statues all over Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union over the next 2 years disappeared. It's hard to find a statue of Joseph Stalin now. And they built thousands of them. That's why you build statues. You got a bunch of full crane, we're in power. Well, there's Khrushchev. And Khrushchev, yes, he spoke in the UN and brought a shoe to beat on the podium. He did not take off his shoe. He brought a shoe to beat it for emphasis. It's a Russian thing. And he wanted to end the arms race because he thought it was wasting too much of Soviet resources. But he didn't want to end it unless he had a position of strength, and he had it. In 1956, the Soviets shocked the world by launching the first satellite, Sputnik. Sputnik wasn't very big. It had a low orbit. It would eventually degrade and crash. Had a little tiny radio transmitter that literally just beeped. But you could pick it up in the United States overhead for that short time it was in orbit with its shortwave radio. And the orbit was so low, it was easy to see at night on a clear night. Now, Eisenhower actually knew the truth. The Soviets kind of lucked out. And they're way behind in rocket technology in the United States. But that's not the way citizens of the US saw it. It was an absolute panic. And I tried to downplay it and realized, no, Sputnik is like another victory in the Cold War. Like, just had Hungary, and we just had, Hungary, other issues in Western or in Eastern Europe, and Korea seemed like a loss. The Soviets just exploded their super. And so I announced in desperation the Navy team. There was a Navy team and an Army team working on rockets. And they announced the Navy team, their rocket's ready to launch. They have a rocket ready to shoot a satellite into space. The Soviets aren't really here. We're right there. They just beat us by a couple days. Nobody was more surprised by that announcement than the Navy team, who had all kinds of problems. The Army team was actually clearly ahead. Well, the Navy got their rocket ready, and there was a lot of finger crossing, and they did the countdown, which came from a German silent movie, the whole idea of a countdown, from the 1920s, Metropolis. And it got about 2 feet off the ground and exploded. So now we look like idiots, and here's one of the more famous headlines. Oh, what a flopnik. Get it? And now, the Eisenhower administration, they could see it. We used the bomber gap against the Democrats. Wow, will the Democrats be able to use this? Which they will. Because if you have a rocket big enough to get a satellite into orbit, you have a rocket big enough to carry a nuclear weapon over the Arctic and hit American cities in half an hour. And this changes everything. So, out of this, the fear that the Soviets were winning will lead to two big things. First off, the Army and Navy team combined into NASA. These are cartoons showing U.S. complacency, and there's Sputnik going over his head. And here's the Senate education lag as the Soviets run ahead. And for the first time in American history, the federal government began to aid public education by promoting science education. The first time that sciences would be emphasized in the American schools, especially after the Scopes monkey trial, get my years right, 30 years earlier. But why did Eisenhower know the United States was ahead? In fact, Eisenhower would use this as an excuse. Yes, the U.S. would get a satellite off Cold Explorer. Ike wanted to be a peacemaker. Khrushchev also wanted to end the war. And in 1960, they agreed to a peace summit in Paris. Both sides quit testing nuclear weapons. Here's Khrushchev. He actually went to the United States, did a little tour. Here he is, seen a dairy cow. He was supposed to stay for 2 days, ended up staying for 2 weeks. And traveled across to the United States, which had to be just awesome. So here he is, checking a cow out in Wisconsin, and here he is at the brand new Disneyland. Which, the whole idea is,
and he debated Richard Nixon at Disneyland. It's kind of an amazing time. They were going to do an arms control summit. Eisenhower was confident, though, that the United States was ahead in all ways. Why? Because we had very effective spying equipment, especially the U-2. The U-2 was a plane that was doing illegal flights over the Soviet Union, hundreds of them. If the Soviets would have done this to the US, we would have lost our mind. It flew at 65,000 feet over Soviet air defenses. They can pick it up on radar. Khrushchev complained in the US, said, typical communist lie. Yet its cameras were so precise at 65,000 feet, you could read the license plates on cars from 65,000 feet. And we knew the Soviets were behind because we responded. So when they're going to meet at Paris, we knew we were ahead. And Khrushchev said, no Paris unless you stop the flights. Eisenhower agreed. But then the CIA said, one more flight. Just one more. One more flight. Flown by Francis Gary Powers in 1960. Out of Iran. And it was shot down. The Soviets shot it down for various reasons. Are the bells not ringing? No, it's not time yet. The bell should ring. Ah, good. So, did I tell you about review sessions? I went over that. All right. Goodbye, everybody. We're going to go through a whole lot tomorrow. We're doing dining and or dancing entertainment.
As I stole it last week, and I forgot. I literally just put it in my bag.
Really?
Yeah.
Please. Oh, really? Yeah, please. No, he just knocked the poster down, so I go one day. Yeah, please do. I would love to see that. Oh my God. Yeah, send it. Well, it's something. You guys won, didn't you? Yeah, big shot. Yeah, congratulations. Your guys' flow was great. Do it tomorrow for loss. Do you have it?
I got the pictures. I didn't know there was a
Are you going tomorrow?
Get it to me before school. I mean, today. Yeah, just bring it today. Goodbye, everybody. Hello, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Did you take the test?
duct tape fit. It was crazy.
Do these practice tests?
I did, and I will tell you tomorrow.
How'd you do?
For class. Okay.
Okay. Pretty good. How'd you do?
Right now.
Get it tomorrow for class.
I did decently on my own.
Huh?
I completely forgot about the practice test.
You got to get them done.
So can I get it done for tomorrow?
Hmm?
Get it done for
It'll be, if you get it to me before class, I won't mark it as late.
Okay.
If you get it to me after class, it will be late. All right, everybody. You have practice test too. I am giving you credit for this.
I did it for today. I actually did it.
I was trying to. I was trying to. More class tomorrow, okay?
I did a few.
All right, everybody. I am collecting this. I am giving you credit on this.
Oh, wait.
But I want you to grade them.
It's not supposed to write them. I
Okay. Why did you not recycle it, you punk? Because little things are, so, everybody, first thing.
I forgot. I did. This was behind this.
We're
I pulled one out and it started going off. And I realized.
It's not there.
Alright,
All right, everybody, as long as you didn't write on, please turn in your 2 practice tests. If you didn't do it, you better get to me before class tomorrow. It's going to be late. And I wanted you to grade them. So, go ahead and turn them in, and if you have a graded, go ahead and make a separate pile right here with the graded blue.
Oh, just this.
And then, so, there you go. Make sure your name is on it. So if you got 33 and above, you're good. 38 and above, you're very good. 44 and above, I think you nailed it. Tomorrow before class. Tomorrow before class. Yeah, I want you to go through it. Grab one of each right there. There's 2 of them. Grab one of each. We can make it fun.
I haven't this is like the reason why
Okay. I just want to say.
Yes, I wrote on it.
Was that, this happened? Why like normal? It happens. Nice action shot. Retired after the march?
I did this one. I did this one.
Yeah, it's. And imagine it can't be after a while. What do you play?
I think that's
And it's, it already takes enough breath and walking and even more. Yeah. Trying to play a trombone. All right, do I have everyone? All right, so if you did not get it done, get to me tomorrow before class, and I won't mark it late. And yeah, send it to me on Teams. Send it to me on Teams. Yeah.
You saw me there
You also, I
in
talked
line,
to you.
so.
Yeah, I want a picture though. I want an action shot.
Oh, that was this.
Action! Action!
Okay.
Show your photographic skills. Get good depth of focus, nice framing, no CGI either. I want this all real, no green screen. Yeah.
So how come I sent mine, you said there was too much action?
Well, yours was terrifying.
I was losing my mind.
There's just too much stuff going on. How do we do on the test? Now, here's the thing. So let's not send them now. You send it to me later. Put the phones away now. But, or I get a phone next time. But, if you go back and I know you're going to miss them. It's the way it is. You're going to miss them. But hopefully when you went back and looked through them, there'll be a few like, oh, I could have gotten that one. I could have gotten that one. And there might be a few. I have no idea. Okay, just do your best. And I know they word some of the questions weirdly. But, do your best on it. We will do it. I'll give you another one, and we're doing one in class on Thursday. There are plenty of practice tests. If you go on Teams, I'll link to my webpage, and there are so many practice tests on there. There's also, you might have seen one. There's a couple online. The questions are pretty darn close to what they're asked in the AP exams, and it's a quick, easy way to do it. Or there's PDFs of a bunch of other copies. So you look at that on your own, and I will have a review session yet. They're both done by the College Board, and so they're probably both pretty close. Pretty close. If anybody wants, oh, one more thing, I just want to kind of make sure I collected these. If you like, kind of want to do the test again, or one of these again, if you want to borrow this test again, I'll let you do it again. I just want to make sure I collected them all, and I'll just as long as I get them back so I can recycle them. Unless there's some people who wrote on them. Just so I can use them again next year. Yeah, they're both done by the College Board. So at lunch, I will review. And if you have any questions, do you have your answer sheet too? Take it.
Pretty good, I keep my name on
Put your name on it. I'll just give you a few points extra.
Beautiful. Good. All right. And I'll do a review session today at lunch if you want. Tomorrow, at lunch, I will cover everything I can cover on page 11 of that review packet. I told you 11 is your responsibility. You have to get page 11 done. But I will go over as much as I can. So I will get almost through it all. I'll be fast, but I'm going to get through all of it. And I did have a review session last night. You know, people came and that's really good. They came. I understand a lot of things are going on. But that's one of the ways I told you that, especially pages 6 through 10, you know, that when you have to have some things done. Well, part of the way I grade that is on who goes to review sessions. I know who was there, I know who wasn't. And lastly, I will have a review session Wednesday night at 6. I know people have a lot of stuff going on and you can be busy, but I'm giving you that opportunity. Take advantage of it. Okay, let's go ahead then and take your notes out.
I think 6 is just here.
Yeah.
We'll get some done.
All right, let's go ahead. We got to this, right? Let's go take your notes down. Let's get going. Oh, we're still filming. Everyone say goodbye to our viewing audience.
We got some mass testing in the back.
I really like, I'm amassing being